I would like to welcome all of the participants. The first session is rather complex because it's the last one, and on the other hand, it's focused on state aid. Half an hour is not enough to outline all the objectives we are facing. Using this opportunity, I would like to invite all participants to the conference on state aid, which is planned, which is organized by the Competition Authority jointly with the project of harmonization of European Union. It is planned to take place on 27th of May. 27th of May. It will be one day focused exclusively on creation of the system of state aid in Ukraine and the issues nowadays faced before the Time-Monopoly Committee in the context of fulfillment of the commitments. Speaking of the system of state aid, we have to realize that it consists of three main elements that must be introduced in Ukraine. The first one is stock taking of all programs of current state aid that exist. Another element is creation of the system of monitoring of state aid. The third element is control. As of today, the committee already is implementing the pilot project about analysis of the current programs of state aid in the country. It's not by chance which shows energy sector, because it's rather sensitive for Ukraine. Quite a lot of support for companies is directed into the energy field. On the other hand, of course, this is fulfillment of commitments undertaken by Ukraine in the year 2012 when they joined the agreement about establishment of the energy union. By results of that pilot project, in June of this year, we plan to provide our first recommendations, first findings of the committee about admissibility for competition, those schemes of state aid in the field of energy which are currently provided in Ukraine. In the first session, we spoke a lot about our international commitments in line with association agreements. In that respect, I would like to note that the first commitment, which comes into force from 1st January 2019, in 3 years after beginning of the association agreement, as of today, was nearly fulfilled because Ukraine already approved domestic legislation regulating the sphere of state aid, primary legislation, in particular the law. Also, important changes were made into the budgetary code as a stage of preparation of the state budget law for 2019. All spending agencies, those requests by the spending agencies must be assessed in the context of admissibility of such requests for competition. The second thing, it's very topical. As of today, it's a very topical issue of assessment of efficiency of state aid in Ukraine in the context of the last trends, such as the creation of industrial and technology parks, free economic zones, because all of those concepts, first of all, are based on the companies that will be working within those mechanisms will be based on certain privileges, such as tax benefits, grants, and therefore, even before the moment of enactment of the law on state aid, it's important that those legal initiatives that are being developed now by the government and the parliament would be in compliance with requirements of the law on state aid. It is important that right now the committee makes an assessment of draft laws. Before 2017, we can only express our concerns about possible cases of negative consequences, and it is very important to be able to resolve them yet at the stage of development of such draft laws, rather than doing later in 2017, having them harmonized, which will be more difficult. Actually, the activities were introduced by the committee. Institutional mechanism within the structure of the department. There is a department for state aid. About the regulatory framework, as of today, they developed and approved most of the acts of the committee, in particular, they registered in the Ministry of Justice the procedure of information about the current state aid, the procedure of monitoring the state registration. There is a procedure of notification of the new state aid. They developed the procedure of review of cases, and now we are focusing our attention on improvement or finalizing one of the most important documents, which is the draft act of the government that will determine the criteria of admissibility of state aid. We shall be able to discuss all that in the month of May on that big conference for state aid. If we speak about our plans in the context of introduction of such a system in Ukraine, most probably in this respect, the most important and complex element is actually ideological aspect, because Ukraine, as a post-Soviet country, will have quite a typical, quite a good perception of any privileges, any kind of support to economic agents. In this respect, introduction of the main European principle, which functions in the EU countries, in particular as a state aid, shall be prohibited, except for some cases of exceptions that undergo compulsory assessment for their admissibility for competition and trade. This will be the biggest challenge to us. At the second moment, we would like to say the main objective of the competition authority as an authorized agency in this field is both fulfillment of the system of state aid necessary for Ukraine only as part of our international commitments before European partners. And the main objective is that any state aid provided in Ukraine must be pro-competitive. And this is an objective of functioning of any competition authority. I will not take much of your time. Just would like to give the floor to Dr. Eugene Stewart.
Thank you very much. And firstly, can I take this opportunity to wish you all, on behalf of the small Irish community in this part of the world, a very happy St. Patrick's Day. The 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day, and that indeed is how we know that there are only 503 days left until the law on state aid comes into effect on the 2nd of August 2017. Now, in case you don't know, I think every Irish pub in Kiev will be partying tonight, tomorrow night and Saturday night. And it's a great opportunity to check how competitive the pubs are in Kiev. The last time I was working with the Irish Competition Authority, that was one of our biggest policy concerns, to keep the price of the pint of Guinness down and keep the whiskey cheap. Those days have gone. Competition is there and the prices have gone up. Irish whiskey is cheaper in Kiev than it is in Dublin, but what can we tell you? These are big, complex issues for competition experts in the antitrust area. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't normally work on St. Patrick's Day as a point of principle, but today is a special day, and this conference is very important to you and to us. On behalf of the project supporting the public procurement reform in Ukraine, which is also supporting the development of the state aid system in Ukraine, this conference is of particular importance to us. We are working with the Anti-Monopoly Committee in Ukraine in areas including bid rigging and including the further development of the complaint review system. But most particularly, we are working in the area of developing the state aid regulatory system, and the Anti-Monopoly Committee is and will continue to be the state aid regulator in Ukraine. I don't know if the slides are running or do we have a clicker. Doesn't matter. Let's continue. State aid, for those of you who don't know what it is very briefly about the impact on competition and also on trade. Thanks. Of is that right? Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, it's about the impact on competition and trade of subsidies, tax breaks, and other forms of government assistance or support, whether it's direct or indirect, and which has the effect of benefiting some firms and therefore impacting negatively on competitors, in other words, the firms that do not receive the benefit. Now, nearly all state aid affects competition and trade in some form or another, and the role of regulation indeed is to avoid undue negative effects on competition and trade. And how this is done is the particular magic of state aid regulation, and it is a very complex process, as anybody who's been working with us will tell you. The European Union doesn't define state aid quite deliberately, and this is the case for the last 70 years. And the definition of what is state aid has evolved over all of that time. But at least for Ukraine, the law in Ukraine does define state aid to undertakings, meaning support through state resources or local resources in any form whatsoever, which distorts or threatens to distort competition by creating advantages for the production of certain types of goods or certain types of business activity. Now, several people have said to us, well, we're in the WTO, we've been looking after the subsidies agreement for several years. Not good enough. WTO subsidies disciplines, very mild, not really terribly relevant, except perhaps on the point of the WTO subsidies definition, which the European Commission, in fact, claims to have drafted. I don't know how true that is, but I've heard that story. Secondly, the Energy Community Treaty already since 2011 says you must have EU-compatible state aids and only EU-compatible state aids in your energy sector since 2011. And already infringement proceedings have started because that has not yet happened in Ukraine. And as Anna mentioned, energy subsidies are a big issue in the overall scheme of things here in Ukraine. But under the association agreement, there's a brand new field of regulation, a brand new field of law coming to Ukraine. It's here already, and it kicks in this year and next year, and especially after 503 days. There's a law on state aid to undertakings adopted in July 2014, which has to be fleshed out in a lot of detail between now and August 17. To take account of the substantive and procedural rules that are needed to make the system happen. In the EU, there are 2,000 pages of secondary legislation on state aid. How do I know? We counted them on the project. One day we had to. And that's excluding at least 2,000 more pages of judgments from the European Court of Justice that have a lot to say about how you interpret the first 2,000 pages of secondary legislation. So the big question for Ukraine is Ukraine getting ready with only a small amount of time left? And here there's a very brief summary and very small writing of what is required of Ukraine under the association agreement. Legislation is required. That's done. Primary legislation is done. Agriculture, fisheries and defence sectors excluded. That's pretty much done. The appointment of an independent national state aid regulator, the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine, that much is done. The creation of a state aid inventory or register of all state aids in Ukraine, central level, regional level, local level, that's starting. A lot of work to do there yet. A review and alignment of existing state aids in Ukraine with EU rules and the state aid system. Nothing started yet. That's going to take some time. Notification of new and altered state aids in Ukraine starts 2nd of August 2017. A lot to think about by central government ministries. Nearly every ministry will be affected. Many regional authorities will be affected, and perhaps some local authorities also. From August 2017, if state aid is granted illegally, it may be recovered. That is a big danger for people receiving state aid and a big embarrassment for anybody giving illegal state aid. However, Ukraine, for the time being under the association agreement, gets the maximum flexibility in terms of aid levels allowed under the EU rules for at least 5 years. That is good for the economy and the investment climate in Ukraine as we move forward. Okay, enough of that. We go to the next one. And I'm anxious not to detain you. Is Ukraine ready? Ukraine must start reviewing its existing economic policies in many different areas to be sure that it is ready to work properly and effectively with the state aid system from August 2017. Now, we did a survey last year and we found at least 110 existing laws creating state aid schemes of one sort or another, and that excludes, more or less excludes energy. They all need to be looked at to see are they still needed and what will be the situation post August 2017. There's a great need for training in Ukraine for officials at all levels and also for the Parliament of Ukraine, where a lot of new legislation dealing with areas like industrial policy tends to emerge. We are carrying out our second major training program in April of this year, and there are many secrets of state aid control that we will reveal to those who take part in this training, including the very interesting question that I know you are really concerned about. Could Christopher Columbus have discovered America if the European Commission was controlling state aid at the time? Now, we discussed that in October 2014, and we had some interesting answers to that question. But for those of you who are interested in training, there's a big program in April. For the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine as regulator, this is going to be a slightly different type of regulation. It cannot be the kick in the door, dawn raids type investigation, because the subject matter is different, and indeed the group of regulated is very different. So there will be an important advisory role for the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine in helping public authorities to keep things the right side of the state aid rules. And I know work is already beginning in the Anti-Monopoly Committee on that. The EU, for its part, is currently assisting this process via our project, and there is a large new project due to start later this year that will continue the work for several years. But in the meantime, there are many expenditure measures, tax measures, special and exclusive rights arrangements, and special rights given to providers of public services, which need to be looked at and need to be understood as coming within the scope of this future state aid regulation. There are also in Ukraine many sensitive industrial sectors where under EU rules you can normally not give state aid unless you're going to close down businesses. The coal and steel sectors are two good examples of that. As Anna mentioned, we won't get a chance to talk about all the wonders of state aid control at this conference, but there is a conference being planned for the 27th of May. Now, this promises to be a very interesting conference, and in the last few days, I've written to a fellow Irishman whom I could only describe as the Donald Trump of the state aid system. I won't mention his name because he hasn't agreed to come yet, but I'm hoping that he will be there to give us his unique read on what it's like to work with the EU state aid system from an airline's point of view. Okay, all the time we are talking about developing the system, there are indeed new state aids being created in. Don't switch. Oh, thank you. There are new state aids being created in Ukraine. There are many initiatives currently before the Verkhovna Rada on matters as diverse as foreign investment, export credit, and SME development, industrial policy, and so forth, many of which will give rise to issues, not of necessity problems, but issues concerning the state aid regulatory system. There is a process of privatization continuing at the moment, some of which involves efforts or will involve the need to rescue and restructure certain firms. That can give rise to state aid questions. And while Ukraine is free to do what it likes in these areas between now, let's say, and August 2017, there is a risk that some of these things may have to be dismantled if they prove problematic after August 2017. And I think it's very useful that there is a dialogue going on right now between the Anti-Monopoly Committee and some of these law drafters on some of these questions, so at least some of the main points can be flagged in advance. So for state authorities, there's a huge need now to recognize that the association agreement and even the Energy Community Treaty creates constraints that have to be considered carefully, and that those authorities start talking constructively to the AMCU about what happens when this system becomes operative. For policymakers, there's one single piece of advice on new policies. Keep your policies general, so then you can say that there's no big impact on competition. The more you make them selective, the more you make special interest cases involved in what you give or who you assist, then you have state aid issues. But for example, if you had a very low tax rate for small business and all of them qualify to get it, you don't have a state aid problem. So there are many imaginative ways in which you can not simply evade the state aid rules, but come up with more constructive policy solutions that do not or should not give rise to competition or trade issues. Quick word for the business community. When the system kicks in, there will be a duty of care on businesses receiving state aid to know that it is legal. And if it turns out not to be legal, there will be a liability for a period of up to 10 years where you may be called on to repay that state aid with interest if there's a problem. Also for business, there will be a new right to complain about competition effects if you see a competitor receiving state aid and you do not, or you feel that it is impacting on your business. And finally, there will be a need to take into account any conditions associated with receiving state aid in the future to make sure that they are fully complied with, because there is a new category of mischief created by the law on state aid to undertakings, and it is called the misuse of state aid. And there, if that arises, there will be a liability also to repay the state aid with interest. Now this all sounds very strange and complex, but for Ukraine, there are huge advantages to be derived from this system. Now they will take a few years to kick in, but they are important. Firstly, a state aid regulatory system does improve the standard of public finance management. It helps to avoid duplicating and wasteful public expenditure in the form of state aid, or indeed, whether it's expenditure or indeed tax breaks, it doesn't really matter, the effect is the same. Secondly, it contributes to the anti-corruption efforts of Ukraine, because it is known here, and not just here, but certainly here, that secret subsidies have been given in the past, and in many cases, state aid has been given to firms with absolutely no justification, apart from, to use that great American expression, political capture. Thirdly, the system will indeed help to improve the level of competition in the economy by removing cases where an artificial competitive advantage is given to some firms and sustains them in business when perhaps they should be out of business a long time ago. Fourthly, the new system will help to ensure that whatever state aid is given to business, and there will still be state aid allowed, don't get me wrong on that the measures created are likely to succeed, that they're justified first, and there's a good chance they will succeed. Now, how will that happen? It will simply happen by ensuring that there's a dialogue and a process of vetting that goes on in relation to a state aid. Because typically, politicians love to introduce a state aid like that. Here's a tax break for you, here's a grant for you, and we'll see what happens, and if nobody is there to second guess us, we'll just, play with taxpayers' money and just see what happens. The state aid system makes an important contribution to avoiding that kind of nonsense which happens everywhere. Next, it will help, obviously, to improve the functioning of the market economy. I won't dwell on that. I think that one is fairly obvious. And finally, it will make an important contribution to helping Ukraine to fulfill its international commitments, not just to the EU and the Energy Community Treaty, but also under a variety of agreements under the WTO, which are somewhat honoured in the breach by most member states of the WTO, I would have to say. So, the benefits will start 502 days from tomorrow. And if preparations are not already underway in Ukraine, in different parts of the system, in the business community, in ministries, they really should start soon, because there is a lot to think about. And the main intention, and this needs to be remembered, is only to allow state aid that is really needed, that is fair and reasonable, and that it is likely to succeed. In other words, as we say on one of our posters here, the overall objective is to go for smart subsidies. And from my point of view and from the point of view of the project, we are looking forward to continuing discussion with this in the future. Time is already running late, so last but by no means least, today is the day when everybody is Irish, and I want to wish you all a very happy St. Patrick's Day. Thank you very much.